cloud. Straight after this, we'll do a brief Q&A, and then we'll have a final sum-up summary.
Thank you, Paul. So Paul has taken a few of the things I was going to say there. But what he didn't mention was that when he asked me to come and make it real, as he said, you know, this, to take it out of the clouds and bring it back down to earth in terms of giving a practical example of this stuff in action. He says it's just a small, intimate gathering of my closest friends. So I think wait for I'm sure the Christmas cards must be electronic. So as you said, my name is Mark Cawley. So as the principal for managed services in eircom, what we do, obviously people will be intimately familiar with the traditional business that we offer in terms of voice and telephony services. But in the real world, there is this idea of the consistency of dial tone. You know, if you have whether you have a lift in your building or an alarm system or a smoke system or any of these kind of things, you have to get a plain old telephone circuit in there, because if the case there's a power outage, people still want to be able to dial out. So there's in the back of our minds, there's more of almost a faith in dial tone being there than there is of the power utility being there. And what I always say to people is, and that doesn't come, that's not just by chance. That's there because of, you know, tens and hundreds of years, in fact, well, not hundreds, let's not over-exaggerate, tens of years of experience and of bringing a rigid approach to processes and procedures. And certainly, you know, a lot of people's perspectives of eircom would be a very slow organization, but one thing that clearly we have a great reputation for is that consistency of dial tone. And so what we have done is, I suppose, is to take that heritage and take the IT skills and the IT experience that we have and bring it into the cloud. And as Andy said, the network-centric nature of the cloud makes it a very good environment for us. We're very comfortable and very experienced in investing tens and hundreds of millions in infrastructure and recouping that money on a per penny or per cent per minute. So that pay-as-you-go model that is synonymous with the cloud is also something that we're important. My other role in eircom is to make Andy O'Kelly's predictions come true. So I'll just go through the objectives very briefly. Set the scene. Talk about this case study for our client in terms of the background. The solution itself, obviously that may not be completely applicable to a lot of the things that you may be looking at, because the solution is an end result of understanding what the customer's requirement was, sharing some of the lessons learned and some of the conclusions. I have tried to do that with a focus towards the compliance and security side of this customer's requirement, as opposed to some of the application-centric information. I should also make the point that our solution is based upon our infrastructure as a service offering, as opposed to a platform or a software as a service solution. I had failed to understand the sequence of my slides when I said my job was to make Andy's predictions come true. So this is the point. You have to have the Dilbert slide. And I suppose to summarize, what we're basically what this is driving to is the idea of understanding who's controlling things, where are decisions being made. Because fundamentally, the issues around securing applications and securing data in the cloud are not, you know, it's not a whole new approach to the what. It is to the how. So the ability to be able to lift the lid and look underneath and understand how things are being done is important. Perhaps the more traditional approach to this thing is the idea of knowing the details. So in the traditional data center world, people understand where things are, where the data is. You know, what machine it's on, what server it is on, what data center that server is in, what LUN on a SAN the data is at, what level of RAID protection is on there. All of those infrastructure side of things. They have come up with business continuity plans. They've done business impact assessments that allow them to determine what is the priority of the different applications. In what time period do I need to restore the service at. What level of availability is important for me. And if they're doing things properly, obviously they have done this from the outset, with their security people being involved right from setting the strategy side of things into the practical design from a technology perspective and a service perspective. And then the CFO or the CIO reads an article about the cloud and comes back in and says, right, lads, what are we going to do about this cloud? Can you come up with a cloud strategy for me by Monday? And they have to reverse engineer and figure out, okay, so cost savings and all the usual buzzwords that are out there. But fundamentally, it goes back to this list of questions about who has control. How do I assure myself of business continuity? How do I assure myself of what the access policies are in and how they'll be implemented? How do I assure myself that my data is segregated from other people's data? And that's where we come in. You know, we've learned the lessons. We've responded to these things in the past, in the traditional data center environment, but also with our core business, and the ability to be able to apply the right level of a security wrap or a compliance wrap around a solution, I think is where we would think we have a particular strength. We're never going to be of the size or scale of Amazon. I mean, Paul's point about a large company like eircom, and in an Irish context, it is a large company. But we were having conversations. I mean, we are a user of cloud services. You know, we use Salesforce.com, and in conversations with Microsoft, looking for investigating the options that Microsoft's cloud services might have had for some of our internal use. The feedback was we were looking for, you know, tweak A and tweak B and customization C, and they were saying, yeah, but you're only 6,500 seats. You're not really big enough for us to think about customizing this thing. So if eircom can't get the global providers to customize, most Irish organisations are not going to be of sufficient scale to be able to have that level of conversation. And so, to be quite frank, that's where eircom sees one of its strengths, is in being able to tailor solutions for our customers. And, you know, so that security thing, Andy mentioned earlier on about two of the big flagship clients that we would deal with. So I would suggest that the majority of you will be familiar with renewing your motor tax online, and that's a PCI compliant infrastructure that eircom hosts and manages. We don't do the application, we do the infrastructure side of that, including the networks. And then ROS, whether you're a PAYE person or the financial controller of your organization, you'll be familiar with Revenue Online service. And that the fundamentals behind that is identity. And identity is governed through a PKI infrastructure that eircom hosts and manages right through to the application. And that's one of those like key management Paul mentioned and Matthew mentioned earlier on as being very important. That's, you know, so we've cut our teeth on those issues and those problems over quite a number of years. So we've taken those lessons and we've taken that experience, and we've built up a toolkit across a number of different areas. I think this is hopefully close enough to what Matthew had painted as being the common pillars. Ultimately, we need to come across this from the perspective of identity, the people involved, the data, which is ultimately at the heart of it, compliance in the round, and the technical IT architecture, and the infrastructure and facilities that underpin all of that. And so you see, we have a number of tools at our disposal, which we pull together and put into the right type of solution for the right type of client. So to get into the nub of the customer themselves, so when we were asked to make the presentation, obviously we would love to be able to tell you who the name of this customer is, and any of you who are in the industry will understand the issues around getting a customer to be a case study for you, particularly when there is a security element to it. I suppose they almost feel like, well, if I stand up and say I've got this solution, they are leaving themselves exposed to having somebody come in and making opportunistic attacks on them. So we weren't in a position to get clearance, but we are continuing to do that, and certainly when we get the right agreement, we'll be making as much marketing capital out of this customer as possible. So if you all send me your email address, I'll send you the customer's name in February. But so we're going to call them Acme Financial Services today, and they are there's a subsidiary of a global conglomerate. They provide back office payment processing services to global names global names who are either online e-businesses or service providers. And their objective was basically they were looking for the initial requirement was to get a backup location for their production systems, which are hosted on the continent. And this solution had to be compliant with their own internal policies and the policies inherited from the parent organization that were kind of aligned to the BITS standard, and also PCI was of fundamental importance to them. In fact, what they said to us earlier on was, if you look at that CIA triangle in that traditional information security initial lecture that you all get, they were less worried about availability. They would prefer the site to fall over than to be compromised. So it was paramount importance to them from the outset. So in terms of the limitations that the platform had for them, was that it wasn't scalable. So they weren't in a position to turn up and down either functionality or to add new customers in the way that they had aspired to do. It also lacked simple things like a service catalog that would allow them to draw down services, the ability to have a level of self-provisioning. To be fair, they weren't looking for the ability to go onto a website with a credit card and buy a design from scratch. What they needed to have was resource pools that they could flex, that they could move resources from a development environment to a test environment or over to a production environment as they saw fit, without having to buy servers and make any fundamental changes to that. They wanted that on a pay-as-you-go model, and also their existing compliance regime was quite labor-intensive. So being able, going back and showing an auditor, walking an auditor through the data flows and showing them the level of information that was required to prove their compliance was quite labor-intensive for them at that time. So our solution is based upon our instant infrastructure portfolio that Andy would have mentioned earlier on, which is, in essence, it's a VMware-powered software layer that sits upon Cisco and Dell servers. I had to give the Cisco nod, and EMC storage. So it's enterprise-grade equipment, and some of the guys talked earlier on about some of the larger cloud providers who are, in essence, they're taking white boxes and taking all of these things and building these things out. So one of our things is that we have built an enterprise-grade platform that a lot of smaller organizations wouldn't have access to that level of availability and that level of quality technology. But doing this on a pay-as-you-go basis is attractive for them. So across the different domains of the solution, we put in network connectivity between their Irish office and our data center environment, and then direct links back to their site on the continent. I have to be specific about my language. Scalable server infrastructure. So Matthew made the point earlier on about around PCI compliance, that people are not seeing it in black and white, but ultimately the path of least resistance at this point is to map out your application, decide what the data flows are, and determine what element am I going to make have in scope for PCI. And at this point, you got to take, while the PCI people are quite happy to understand virtualization to a certain extent. In essence, once you have virtualized, anything which is in that cluster, or anything which is in that environment becomes in scope for that. So it's very important to be able to draw a distinction between the parts of the platform which are going to involve cardholder data and have that in scope, but equally important to be able to, at a data layer, at an application layer, to be able to take the parts of your application which don't require any level of personal identifiable data to fall through that flow, and then you can siphon that off and treat it, take it out of scope of your PCI platform. Storage and backup, again, one of the objectives of this project. The initial objective, as I say, was to provide a disaster recovery site for the production environment. But when we got into conversations with them, in essence, our initial point about disaster recovery, a lot of organizations are using infrastructure as a service as a platform for disaster recovery. It's a cost-effective way of them getting a DR platform in place. And one of the good things about using a cloud infrastructure for it is that you can have a relatively modest and small infrastructure footprint, and you might trickle feed data from your production system over to your DR system. And if there is a disaster, then you can just turn up the amount of resources that you throw at the platform in order to take a production load. So that's quite a typical use case, and that was the initial conversation that we had with the client. But as things moved on, then they decided that rather than being a cold or warm standby site for their production environment, that they would actually look to do a level of global site selection to manage the load across the two facilities. And so for new customers, they would start off by putting new customers on the Irish site rather than having the problem of migrating data from the production environment over. So again, the same point about being able to have a level of demand management to understand what the capacity footprint required on the new platform. In the past, they would have had to do the age-old game of deciding what it's going to be at peak time and provisioning for that. Whereas with us, they were able to have a level of flexibility with that. Data center network and security. Again, the traditional networking technologies in play there, and then a range of managed services and the governance, risk, and compliance element of it. As I say, not just to the international standards like PCI, but they were also. It was also important that they were able to show the parent organisation that the infrastructure that was put in place was compliant with their own internal standards as well. So what we did was we brought them through our cloud readiness workshop, and that involves various people from our perspective, infrastructure specialists, security specialists. Paul would have worked closely with the customer at the initial strategy sessions around what their plans were going to be, and ultimately it was about taking in the requirements both from the business and the technical side of the house, and building out a picture of the current state and a picture of where they wanted to go, and doing a cloud readiness assessment, which, some people think it means walking through a data center with a clipboard and saying, that server can go, that server can go, that server can go. But ultimately, it's about data and it's about application. And understanding, certainly from our own perspective, some of the examples that we would have come across are people who have written applications, and the applications are, they haven't been touched for 10 years. They might be used, a few times a month, and they're perfectly adequate for what's required. But they are, they're relatively safe by staying within the organization's the perimeter of their data center, behind their firewalls, whatever. They're not really going to be good candidates for moving them out to the cloud, because the level of due diligence that would be required to look at the application, see how secure it is, and what the possible vectors for attack would be, will eat away any cost gains that would be gone from putting it out onto a platform like that. So these kind of conversations, understanding where people are, what their current competencies are, both from a technical and operational perspective. Are you running on multiple platforms? Are you running on platforms which are not easy to virtualize, not easy to put into the cloud? I mean, most of the Most of the infrastructure as a service offerings today are x86 based. So if you're not running on an x86 platform, you end up having to do some level of private cloud. I think that would be universally true at this point. And quite typically, organizations will look at these plans from a technical perspective, understanding as I say, what the level of RAID configuration is, or what they do a capacity plan on the environment to understand what the memory footprint is, or the number of processors that are required. But it's equally important to have a look at service, because the way that you deliver, if you adopt the cloud model to its fullest, the way that you deliver these services, ultimately it's about taking out the inefficiencies of having humans in the middle of that orchestration and automation layer. So the idea that you would have people physically provisioning boxes, or that you would have people patching boxes individually, these kind of things are the inefficiencies that cloud gets over. And a lot of the cost benefits come from increasing the level of automation and stuff. But getting an insight into how your organization works, and understanding what level of automation is appropriate is important. I'll talk about that later on in a while. But understanding what the service model, the service design is. Self-service is another fundamental part of the cloud. And understanding what level of self-service is appropriate. It goes back to the idea of solutions around the person. Understanding who the person is and what level of privileged access they should get is important. Not just not just in terms of do they have a user access to the application, or do they have super user or administrator access to the underlying platform, but also where do they sit in terms of if a provisioning request goes in, is there a workflow that goes in there, is there an appropriate governance around that, or does a developer have the opportunity to add 4 or 5 application servers to the production environment? These fundamental service design, service model issues they're not unique to the cloud. They need to be addressed in most circumstances. They need to be addressed, but they're more particularly open to abuse, if you will, in a cloud services. In the traditional data center model, you are restricted by the physical footprint that you have. In a cloud paradigm, that's not necessarily the case. So then we would go into service implementation, doing a proof of concept. It's all, as Gareth Fitzgerald said, it's all well and good in practice, but does it work in theory? So you have to get these things into a proof of concept environment quite quickly. And that's probably another slight difference of cloud computing versus the traditional approach. It is quicker to turn up a proof of concept. It is quicker to turn up a pilot environment by the very nature of the cloud model and proving things, as opposed to the traditional procurement thing of getting a few people in to do presentations and testing each one individually. That part of the vendor selection and procurement process is made easier by this model as well. It's also from our perspective, it's also easier to differentiate between the person who has a nice PowerPoint slide and the person who actually has an integrated platform in place. But that can be an iterative cycle as well. So the proof of concept or the pilot may point out a few tweaks that need to be revised at the design and go through an iterative process to get the final environment that you want. So in these solution workshops, it's quite a broad church in terms of the areas that we cover. I don't presume to read everything, but ultimately some of the important points that were mentioned earlier on about looking at contracts. Well, I suppose at the first point, understanding what your business objectives and technical objectives out of the project is in the first place, and understanding what part of the application or what data sets are appropriate to go into a cloud infrastructure, and what should stay within your own perimeter. The final thing that we talk about here is a high-level business case, and I'm going to go off the security topic for a moment to show you. This is a slide courtesy of Amazon, and in essence, on this slide, the dotted diagonal line there is the traditional projected demand that you may have in an infrastructure. And the traditional way of addressing that was with the blue line, was that every so often you had to make a step change and you had to make a capital investment to provide the capacity to meet that demand in line with what the forecasted demand was going to be from your business. But so here then in this space you've reached this point and you make an investment. And at this point, you have all this spare capacity, which in essence has cost you money, and it's not being used. So over here they call this is the opportunity cost, or basically the price of providing capacity. And then farther up here, then you've missed the boat. You didn't your capacity. The actual capacity is the red line. Actual capacity actual demand increased faster than you had projected. So here, people are just not able to connect, or they're not getting a level of service that they required. So the fundamental of the dynamic nature of cloud computing is that you can just stay just ahead of the curve as is required. A fundamental thing again about cloud is that it can go down. It isn't always going to go. It isn't always going to go up. And from our perspective, it's important that we understand the nature of the customers that we have on our platform. There's no point in us having 100% retailers who all want 100% capacity at Christmas time. You want to have a few, I don't know what, card shops and flower shops so that they're busy at Valentine's Day or whatever. That's it's those traditional demand management things that telcos and carriers would deal with over the years that come into play, that make it a natural place for something like eircom to play in. I think that pretty much covers that one. So to get into the solution that we put in place for this customer, it's a hybrid solution. So in a lot of the traditional definitions of private and public and hybrid, clearly the hybrid is always going to be a combination of one or more cloud environments. This particular solution in itself is a hybrid by its nature. It's a hybrid within the single environment. So in our model, we basically offer shared resource pools, and as I said earlier on, the shared resource pools really are where you want to have the maximum scalability, the maximum flexibility, the minimum amount of outlaid capital at the outset. But in order to be able to do that in a compliant fashion, well, that's probably a slightly bigger statement than it should be. As I say, it is the easier way to have this in a compliant fashion is to take anything which isn't going to actually have data or be part of the flow of data, which will have cardholder data on it. They're the parts of the application, or the parts of the environment that are readily suitable to the shared resource pools. And then we have dedicated resource pools for the core parts of the application that are going to carry cardholder data. And in this environment, in fact, it wasn't just the production. For a lot of the testing stages, they would actually be testing with real data to a certain extent. So they were keen to have that would stay within scope for their PCI project as well. I should make the point. So dedicated resource pools and shared resource pools. Dedicated resource pools, in essence, are just VMware clusters that are dedicated to that customer, whereas shared resource pools obviously are shared across a larger customer base. So it means that from an architecture perspective, there are specific areas on a SAN that are dedicated to that customer. It could be just a LUN within the SAN. It could be a whole tray of storage or multiple trays of storage that are dedicated to that customer. So they can have the level of control that the guy spoke about earlier on. And the shared resource pools obviously are, as I say, are spread across the rest of the customer base. So again, the solution it also incorporates So our tool set is based upon BMC. So we're taking status and state change alerts off of the platform. We're doing the full ITIL service management wrap around that system as well. And ultimately, this goes back to the CMDB, which is the central database that makes it all real. So being able to tie in individual parts of the infrastructure with individual business services of the client. So understanding that capacity on one server is reaching an alert level, understanding what business services that's going to have an impact on, and being able to, I suppose, talk back to the customer on a business service basis as opposed to on a per component, either physical server or virtual server basis. We also obviously offer a series of utility services within the data center, whether it's NTP, which is a one true source of time, making sure that logs are going to be consistent by all of these devices. Referencing a single time source is important in these kind of environments as well. Job scheduling is the other thing, which is important. I'll just touch on this briefly. So in this kind of environment, it was important to be able to move. To be able to schedule jobs, but there were interdependencies between different applications in different parts of the stack. So just running a local cron job on a machine wasn't going to do it. You have to have a level of orchestration between different applications in different layers. But that ability to stop and start applications obviously is a level of privileged access, which is you need to have the policies, you need to have the constraints set out as early as possible and design the solution accordingly. So again, that's one of the things not to underestimate. And then the other thing was around secure DNS. So the customer connects to their end customers over private circuits, but also over IPsec VPNs as failover to, not private circuits, over MPLS circuits and over IPsec VPNs. And the IPsec VPNs were all established using the IP address of the gateway at the remote end, which presented particular migration problems. So as they move from their own moving customers that would be set up with their own IP address space to the solution in Ireland with our IP address space presented a little bit of a migration hurdle that we had to overcome. And in essence, so we had to move away from, I suppose, identifying clients at either end by IP address to DNS. And in using DNS, obviously, that presented another opportunity for data to be compromised. So we had to ensure that we put a more robust DNS service in place than you would typically expect for a normal run-of-the-mill environment. And I think that is, that pretty much is the important parts off of that slide. So from a business perspective, what the customer got out of this, and again, I'm sorry, this is quite a text-heavy slide, but just to draw the contrast between the prior environment, which I should say is still there, and the new environment. So the big thing for the customer is that ability to be able to dynamically provision resources as they need under their own control, so that the self-service element of it. To be able to utilization again. So we had some very high numbers. I'm not sure if they are still there. Yeah. So the utilization on systems went from 25-30% to 75% plus. So they were able to, as I say, keep that line between demand and capacity as close as possible. And in any traditional business, that's what you want. You don't want to be carrying loads of stock if it's not required. So it's almost the just-in-time ERP theory taken into an IT infrastructure context. So again, a lot of text there, I apologize, so you can clearly read those points for yourself. So in terms of the lessons learned, I've tried to pull out the ones that are of most relevance to a compliance and risk and security audience. So classification, and again, I'm not necessarily suggesting that these are exclusively the concerns once you move into the cloud, but certainly they are they come into sharp focus in a cloud context. So classification around the data and around the applications. What ones are going to be in scope for moving into the cloud, and what ones are not. And data, the other thing is that it's not just customer data. So obviously in a compliance environment, the proof of being compliant fundamentally typically is going to be all about the logs. So the logging information and keeping compliant around that is sometimes just as important as the application data proper. So I think we've touched on those points already. In terms of identity, again, it's the traditional problems that you would come across, plus a few more. So one of the things that we had to get over was that idea of this organization had about 70 users, back office users, that would need just regular user access to the application, and then various technology teams, the database teams, the core Tomcat application people as well. They would need various different levels of access, and it was quite obvious that traditional static passwords were not going to necessarily do the trick. So rather than just having a central LDAP, with local usernames in the environment, we ended up federating back to their own directories in their own organization. So that in essence means that they're still doing the how to put it, all of the access policy and the change control around the individual usernames and passwords happens down there, and our responsibility is for making sure that if a person is tagged on the directory with having a particular profile, that's the level of access that they get back at the infrastructure layer. Multi-factor authentication is another thing that we had a series of conversations around. So Matthew mentioned about the virtualization recommendations that have come off of the back of the PCI standard. And like a lot of things in PCI, it's not black and white. It doesn't say do, it doesn't say don't. It makes suggestions and makes recommendations. So trying to figure out at what point to have the appropriate layer of multi-factor authentication, whether that's one-time passwords or whether it's client certificates, trying to put those into the environment at the appropriate point was, again, like every security conversation, that compromise between maximum security and maximum flexibility, and trying to find the point along the scale where the customer is happy to stop. Automation, I've touched on this point earlier on, but trying to find the right compromise between having an appropriate level of automation to get some of the agility and the cost savings that the cloud presents, but not doing away completely with that idea of a human making a decision. And that can be a risk-based decision, or it can be a simple commercial decision. So we spent a lot of time at the design stage in trying to get that right, and then a lot of time at the implementation stage retrofitting the things that we didn't perhaps capture accurately at the start. And that point is just making sure that you have a clear chain of command and being able to show after the effect that says, well, this change request ties back to this access request that was authorized by this particular person, and that they have the appropriate level of privilege within the business context to make that approval. And in relation to compliance, a number of the guys have mentioned this already, that it is all about scope. So trying, like with any project manager, trying to take the scope back in as tight around the flow of PII as possible, and just try to get your certification off the back of that. This second point is that the service provider only plays a supporting role. Ultimately, as both of Matthew and Paul said earlier on, Matthew, Mark, Paul, we need a Luke and Jack. that idea of compliance, it's your responsibility, it's your applications, it's you who gets compliant. The service provider plays a supporting role, and depending upon your choice of service provider, they will play a more active support in the solution than not. And then that dedicated resource pools, I've made this point already as well, that the path of least resistance to getting PCI compliance in these kind of environments is to ring fence and use dedicated resource pools in that one. So to wrap up, this is conclusions, or it's also the subliminal sales message about eircom's managed IT services. But ultimately, we're saying at that point, avoid the lowest common denominator. Don't settle for inflexible contracts that don't allow you underneath the hood or don't let you negotiate terms. Realize it's your data. Take a data-centric view of security. By its very nature, you're handing over an element of control to the service provider, but that doesn't mean that you've lost responsibility. So you need to be able to look under the hood, do your due diligence, get a level of comfort that the processes and controls that are in place within that organization are going to meet your requirements or the requirements of your auditor when they come to audit you. And again, I couldn't emphasize enough the point about the kind of sometimes when you come across the auditor, they are not necessarily the most informed people. So we do spend quite a lot of time educating them as to how these architectures work and how logical separation works. These kind of things. So depending upon the nature of your organization, you're either going to put time and effort into educating your auditor, or time and effort into building a compliance solution that has the least amount of resistance. And yeah, that's the final point, is that if the service provider isn't going to give you the level of clarity that you need, then perhaps they're not going to be worth the cost savings that were projected at the outset of the project. So I'd be very happy to take questions toward the end of the session, or feel free to catch me outside over the coffee later on. Thank you very much.